Spotify may have a new competitor they've never seen, and I believe I'm the first to report on this. So if you guys don't know the history of how Spotify came to power, let's go through a little bit of a history lesson before I get into my hypothesis, because my hypothesis will reveal Spotify's new competitor that may take Spotify out of business, potentially. So as you guys know, during they called it the dot-com bubble. This is when stocks were going crazy. People were getting crazy company valuations, and the stock market was just throwing money at internet companies because they wanted to build up this thing called the internet. So this is when Napster came to power. Now, Napster is important because Napster was the first time that allowed the music industry's copyrights and material be used by the average person. You know, back in the old days, like my age, I was born in 1991. We came up on, like, I vaguely remember cassette tapes. I had Backstreet Boys cassette tape. And my first CD, I think, was Nelly. I forget the exact name of his album. Oh, yeah, it does. It's called Nellyville. That had to be my, first CD that I bought. And during that time, the only way you could really hear music was to go to a music store, put on their headphones if they had a little demo section, and listen to an album. You really weren't hearing music outside of radio or TV. That's kind of where you heard it first, and then you go make a decision to buy it so you could hear the whole thing whenever you want to hear it. So we were kind of bound to the radio and bound to TV programming. But Napster, for the first time, introduced an environment where we can experience music at will whenever we want. We can click here, download a Jeezy album, click here, download whoever was out, 50 Cent at that time. Okay, so this was like a revolutionary thing because for the first time, we could actually hear everybody's music. It wasn't this thing where we had to guess. We were kind of just buying albums based on the one song we heard off the radio, but then the album sucked. Or we heard two songs off the radio, but the whole album was fire. You just never knew until you bought the actual album. So Napster was a huge piece of this puzzle as to why Spotify may be doomed in the near future. And I say near future because I'm going to reveal one key concept. Now, I want you guys to follow the history because the history is so important to this entire equation. During the dot-com bubble, that's when everybody's interest was on internet companies, the same way our current era's interest is on AI. So I want you guys to keep how important this was. Like, for example, Napster, I think, peaked at 80 million registered users in a matter of 2 years. Okay, so as you guys know, Spotify grows in the millions now, but that was unheard of for a company like Napster to acquire that many customers that fast. And it was all because of the craze over the internet. So as you guys know, the RIAA, which I think is the Illuminati, the monopoly of the music industry. We're going to call them the monopoly of the music industry, RIAA, because they represented Universal, Sony, and Warner. Those are the three top record labels in the space: Sony, Universal, and Warner. You would think the three companies are competitors, but they all seem to be working together for their own self-interest. So that sounds a little monopolistic to me, if you ask me. And they basically went after Napster with the lawsuit thing and sued for copyright infringement. And as you guys know, they may have won the battle, but they lost the war because piracy just grew. I remember we were on LimeWire downloading Jeezy mixtapes, printing them to CDs. Soulja Boy was on LimeWire and Kazaa, and man, there were so many BearShare. Goodness, BearShare, I was on that one mainly. And then you saw Pirate Bay pop up. And the music industry for the first time had to realize they can't fight innovation. And I say this key as innovation because I'm not demonizing what Napster was trying to do. Napster was actually solving a problem, which the problem was we couldn't hear music to even know if it was good or not. We had to guess when we bought albums. So we were spending $10, $20 here just to see if the Rick Ross album was any good. And after you spend your budget for the month, you're not going to spend thousands of dollars on music a month unless you're crazy or you're just a baller. So the average person really didn't get to experience the whole gamut of what was out there because it was so restricted by these record labels trying to keep us suppressed and in their way of moving things. They wanted to control every single thing. And this is why I said the music industry tries to fight innovation, but they always lose every single time. So watch this, guys. So they thought they won going against Napster, but they actually lost because Kazaa popped up, LimeWire popped up. As you guys know, if you're into Bitcoin, the whole point of it is to be decentralized, meaning that the whole network is not just on somebody's computer that you could just attack. It's on that person's computer, that person's computer, that person's computer. And it's a peer-to-peer network so that if one computer goes down, the entire network does not go down. So they tried to stop consciousness. And that's why the music industry is considered demonic in some ways, because they try to hold people back on purpose. I think it's actually called planned obsolescence, if I'm not mistaken the term. And that's the art of basically not allowing us to have 12K TVs and 40K TVs, meaning the resolution, because they want us to consume all the 4K TVs first, because they're printing them through the factories. Now, once they max that out, then we'll see the 8K TVs be the same price as the big box TVs we used to have in our living rooms. And then once they sell those, once it peters out, then they'll move into the 12K. But see, these industries are designed to purposely keep us behind because they want to maximize the profit. And that's where greed tends to stop innovation. And that's why we're so frustrated with companies like Apple, for example, because they just didn't innovate for years. And, on the greater stock market, innovation has become, the topic at hand. And that's why AI is so booming, is because for the first time we see true innovation. It's not just people trying to rake people over the coals, taking every dollar they have just to maximize their share price. So as we move forward in this timeline, this is really important, guys. So the music industry thought they won against Napster, but they actually made their enemies grow bigger, because once you beat up the small guy, now we're just looking at you like a bully, which they are a bully, because there's many different occasions where this happens. Okay, so the decentralized networks are like, okay, you want to take us down? Well, let's show you our real power. Okay, and that's when, like I said, Kazaa, LimeWire, everything popped up. Then you have the era where Spotify pops its head up into the race. But before Spotify, we had this kind of hybrid. Okay, we had, instead of like the physical music store, you had this digital music stores. For the first time, we understood e-commerce, and this was through Apple, and it was called the iTunes store. And that's because they had an individual device they created called the iPod. So you had, instead of a cell phone, which was just a cell phone, maybe it could play ringtones, and maybe you could surf the internet. You had, for the first time, a device solely dedicated. I had a Zune, for example, by Microsoft. I had a Zune. I was that kind of guy. I even signed up the Tidal when that came out. I'm just very different when it comes to music consumption. And it was just a dedicated device that you had just for your music. And that's when it slowly became a thing for people to get into iTunes, because for the first time, they have this thing that's not a CD player. They could take it with them. They could walk around. They have headphones, and they could store even more music than they could on a CD. And that's when Apple created this hybrid of, like, instead of you just stealing all your songs, how about we let you download them for a price and put them in your digital device that we control? And again, they tried to control the market, but the greater macro decentralized efforts of the market superseded iTunes, because what iTunes technically did is it took a CD that used to be worth $10 down to, let's say, $1. Why was every song worth $1? Why is a Michael Jackson song the same price as a newcomer's song? Like, there should be clearly price differences, but Apple kind of created this standard uniform pricing for singles and for albums. So album might be $10, whereas a single might be $1. Okay. So it tremendously lowered the value of music in terms of what people used to get in terms of cash. So here's why a Spotify was important. Remember when Napster blew up and the music industry couldn't catch it because it had so much growth? Well, now it's doing the opposite. It was nosediving in terms of the value of the music so fast that the music industry became desperate again for something to rise up, to be innovative around music and the consumption of music. So here comes Spotify around 2008, and they offered what's called the freemium model. So basically, it was the same exact thing as Napster. The competitor that the music industry tried to take down through the the RIAA. They tried to take it down, okay? And now Spotify pops up with the same basic model. It's Napster. It's just now we have technology to insert advertisements inside of the music. So now we can have corporations pay to have their advertisement inside of our streaming environment, and people had already understood Napster. So that's the genius of Spotify, is the technology not to host and stream music. What they were genius in doing is actually attracting advertisers and creating the technology to display ads as people listen. That they call that freemium. But what's different from Napster and Spotify? Like, if you really look at the basics of it, it's people can look up any song they want at will. Same thing as Napster. The only difference is the inserts of ads. And now they can justify the music industry coming aboard. And here's where the majors, they finally were like, okay, we'll license our stuff to you, because now there's money involved. Whereas Napster, there was no money involved. There might not be all the money in the world, but it was some money because of advertisers. So it's the same company, essentially. It's just now we have ads. So now it justifies them doing business, but it's pretty much the same exact company in terms of what it does. All right. Now here's a key turning point. Labels were trying to, again, they tend to hold their power and really flex their power with their ability to license their material. As you guys know, copyrights is really the only thing holding the music industry together, is the ability to claim something and not allow somebody else to copy it for whatever use. That's pretty much what's holding the music industry together today. Now, these record labels were so scorned by their their win/loss against Napster, they were reluctant to actually work with the Spotify because they've seen the past and they just don't want to lose again, basically. And what they did was they licensed out to Spotify for the first time. Now, here's the key. They knew this time around, because of the .com boom, how fast Napster grew, they knew that their business is better than the music business, meaning that they can gain way more attention and grow way faster than the music industry can by itself. So the music industry understood this time around, and they said, okay, we'll let you license our stuff, but also, okay, we'll let you license our stuff, meaning for every person that we'll just give you a blanket license fee, or some people may do a percentage of sales or whatever it is. There's different deal structures, of course, but let's just say they license their music out per year for a fee. They're like, okay, it's cool. We're getting $40 million a year. I'm making up a number here just for the story. UMG might be like, cool, it's cool, we're getting $40 million a year, but we want to own the revenue that comes in, not just sell you our stuff at a flat fee and then we have nothing. So they are basically looking for something to grow as a host, because they are the leech that latches onto the host. So when the host grows, so does that leech, and it keeps getting bigger and bigger, and it's sucking the blood out of the host until it becomes so big that it can be its own thing. So this is the storyline that I present to you guys today. Look at the history of the music industry, and specifically the top 3 labels: Universal, Warner, Sony, represented by the RIAA, which is basically, like I said, they're all joining forces. So if they're competitors, but they're joining forces, how is this not a monopoly? Okay. So I just want you guys to really ask that question, because next up after this part in the story, this changes. This changes everything, because think about it, guys. We went from CDs to now the music industry being invested in this new streaming thing for the first time. So their job is to go out, use celebrities to acquire, users onto the platform. So that's going to take time to grow, but they understood that it can grow fast because of how fast Napster grew. So they gave it a chance, basically. They said, okay, here's this technology that monetizes for the first time. People seem to be buying into it. Let's now pour our energy into it, grow it. And I'm going to get into the irony of the story. But basically, the music industry understood it's growing it reluctantly because they know at some point they're going to flip. Okay. So I want you to understand this. It's kind of like, you guys know the story of Judas, for example. He was hanging out with Jesus, dapping him up, giving him hugs, washing his feet, going seminar to seminar with Jesus, because he knew the whole time he was going to flip. It was in him. It was just a matter of time until he flipped. And the music industry is doing the same exact thing to tech companies. They're playing good now, but they're doing this until they grow to a certain point, so that at that certain point they could flip and do their own thing. Here's the storyline. So once streaming kind of surpassed CD sales, that's when they had evidence that they didn't lose revenue. It was just people wanted a different medium to enjoy music in. And I told you guys the big problem, the big bottleneck in innovation back in the day was the fact that you had to just guess which album was good. You didn't know. You bought a whole album of 30 songs and maybe one was good. You just never knew. And I don't even think you could do returns on CDs. I'm pretty sure you bought it and that was it. So people got frustrated with that that was a frustration of the market underneath the hood. We could only get like 5 CDs a year as a kid. You couldn't get like 20 or 30 CDs. So you're kind of stuck with whatever you have in your little bubble, and all you're kind of relying on is the radio. And that's all you had to really experience next to MTV and BET and all those type of music videos. How else did you discover music? You couldn't. So it was so much of a demand from the audience that was not being met. And that's why streaming was so important, is because it met the demand. It was a real demand. It's just they didn't know how to monetize it yet, because they kept demonizing it because they wanted to take control over Napster. They didn't want Napster to grow up and be better than, it's like Judas being like, yo, that disciple Paul over there, he's getting too cocky. He thinks he's better than me. Let's kill him. It's that type of thing where they get like jealous of stuff growing faster than them if they don't have control or equity. And I think it was around 2015. Now, behind the scenes, they're never going to say this, guys, but let's say in 2008, Spotify joined the race as like the streaming platform. What they'll do most of the time is they'll sign a bunch of engineers who know how to do all this ad tech and like build up platforms, but they'll basically create non-compete clauses. So even if an employee leaves the company, they can't create another company to compete against Spotify. So I'm pretty sure they had that in their contracts, because you don't see these other companies popping up until years later. So the people who knew how to create the ad tech and the platforms and the streaming, they literally couldn't do anything for anybody else for a certain amount of time. And this is why I think there was such a time gap between the next competitors that popped up. And also too, the frustration from the actual artist. Imagine the artists are like, wow, Spotify's now the big dog and there's no radio, everything's changed for the artist. And now like they feel out of control and their life is in the hands of, Spotify streaming. So they live with the revenue from Spotify, but they're like, they're doing this. Why can't I do it? And then you see Jay-Z's title popping up. You see Deezer popping up. You see YouTube Music popping up. And we have to remember labels were reluctant to license out their catalog because their catalog is essentially all the leverage they have. Remember, they're in the business of taking $1 and making 10, not by working, but by taking the dollar, buying an artist and hoping that dollar they take with the artist turns into $2 over time. So they're basically banks. They just go and acquire assets. And if all you have is assets to make your money, then that is it's like holding your cards to your chest, metaphorically speaking. So when Tidal popped up, Amazon Music, YouTube Music, Deezer, for example, now we have competitors in the space. And instead of fighting them because remember, I don't know if you guys remember, when Tidal came out, the whole kind of message behind Tidal was like, for artists, by artists type of thing, where it's like, okay, Jay-Z was behind it. I forget all the characters behind it, but everybody kind of was rebelling, I'll say, against the traditional streaming because the record labels controlled that. But they said, okay, let's create our own by ourselves. Why are we going through all this other stuff? And they created their own platform basically to stream. So now you basically have the record labels licensing out the same material across multiple platforms. And again, it seems like competition, but really what it is just maximizing the market exposure to make sure that every user, whether they're Apple, whether they're PC, Android, whatever, they are now in the ecosystem. And this kind of democratization of streaming licensing rights led to current day Spotify in the understanding, because what you want to do is appear as though you're the underdog. And like I said, the top three companies, Universal, Warner, Sony, what they're doing is trying to create competition because they don't want to make it look like they own streaming. Because if you own streaming and you're the only company, you look like the monopoly. So what do? They create these platforms, and the platforms are just a guise to basically sizzle out at a certain point, as we saw with Tidal kind of, went up and went down type of thing. And they needed that because, again, they needed to appear as though they're the underdog, okay? Because that's what monopolies do. So next in this story, you see the revenue go up into the billions, okay? So there's a chart somewhere on Statista if you guys want the actual chart. I don't have the chart ready today. But when the music industry beforehand basically went down 50% and now it's up like 100 something percent, they're going to keep monetizing. And once you have such a big marketplace, this is when they start to, flex their muscle a little bit, because now they're back where they started. It's kind of like the guy he was a millionaire, he got humbled, and as soon as he got his money back up, he started talking crap on everybody. It's that same mentality in the music industry, and they're doing the same exact stuff. And my hypothesis here, leading into the world of AI, is the same exact thing. So think of it this way. Warner, Sony, and Universal basically work together. They act like they're competitors. As you guys know, the RIAA represents them a lot. And they basically have a monopoly in the music industry. So what they did was, like I said, if Spotify is going up as the host because they have this technology that's monetized, they're going to act as if they're just, friends with them and the underdog, and we're just cool. You Spotify, you take your cut. They're waiting for Spotify to grow the same way they wait for records to get really big before they sue the person who made the record big for a sample that wasn't cleared. They did the same exact thing with Spotify. They're just leeching off of Spotify. As Spotify grows and grows and grows, so does the leech. It keeps growing and growing and growing until the leech believes that it can do its own thing. So parasitic in a relationship with the host. And here's what happens is now you see Universal, Sony, and Warner trying to demand higher revenue shares, trying to get more advances and equity in the platforms. And that's not because for the artists and all this stuff that you guys keep saying. It's not for the artists. It's for the monopolization of the record labels, because they are in the game of buying assets, making those assets worth more, and basically creating it to where there are no more assets being created, so they have the only supply. So they're creating rarity around their assets, and they want to control those assets. So they're doing the same exact thing currently. Now here's the storyline for people who kind of jumped ahead in the podcast. During the .com bubble, you had Napster. Okay, they grew 80 million users in a matter of 2 years. So the music industry could not stop the amount of growth. It was too fast. They couldn't stop piracy because it was peer-to-peer and there was no centralized location to take out piracy. So they mistakenly if you guys study game theory, I went over this in a different video. There's basically, I think it's a Roman example. There was a Roman city, a Roman empire, and there was a rebellious city. And so the rebels in one city had two options. They can go attack the headquarters of the empire, or they could go to the kind of outside cities and conquer those one by one, because the main empire, forgive me, y'all, we're getting into game theory here. The main city would have to make two decisions. They either go straight for the rebels and try to stop them as soon as they start their campaign, or they wait a little bit and go to the city where they know for sure they can at least have more defense. And they chose the latter. So basically in the music industry, what they do is they wait for stuff to grow until they for sure have a point where they could take it down. Okay, the same story happened in 2001 with Napster. The same thing happened with Spotify. Now, they didn't go after Spotify, but they considered it a threat. And what they do is they use their licensing to use that as a lever to get companies to do what they want. And in order for them to survive, they needed a host, aka Spotify. But what they didn't tell Spotify is that they're going to potentially flip on them at some point. So in the current day, you guys know of the Udio, the UMG lawsuit with Udio. Okay, you guys have heard about that. And they're also attacking Suno. Why? It's not about ethics. It's not about the platforms are taking copyrights. I've gone through this many times. It has nothing to do with that. They're trying to do the same thing they did with Napster, is they're trying to legally take them down. And they're like, okay, let me figure this out. So they're going to attack them legally, but then resort to what they did with Spotify, which was do a deal with them, leech onto them until they grow big enough to do their own thing. So as you guys know, UMG, they came to a settlement with Udio. And the reason this is important is because basically the users on Udio, what you can do on Udio, for example, for those who are unaware, is you can generate songs from scratch. So even if you know nothing about music, you can go to a Udio or a Suno, for example, type in lyrics. Even if you don't know anything about making the music, you can just go there to listen to songs. BBL Drizzy. BBL Drizzy. I think Udio was the platform responsible for creating that sample. That Metro Boomin flipped. So this is what I'm saying, is that the AI platforms that can generate music are the new Spotify, are the new Napster, because they can't control the supply that's being created by these platforms. So therefore, it's a competitor to the top three music record labels, Universal, Sony, and Warner. So what do? They go to the RIAA again, their monopoly system, and they go attack Udio and Suno. And you guys have seen people try to create class action lawsuits against Suno and Udio and galvanize all the artists for the ethics of AI and all this bullcrap. All it is a power grab by the actual record labels, because what they're going to do is they're going to attack these companies, and they're not doing it for ethics. They're doing it because they want control of the platform. And as you guys saw, UMG went after Udio, and now UMG has part control over that company now, to where they basically restricted the users that were currently on the old platform from downloading their songs, which means basically it's not a music generation platform the way it used to be. And I think their goals are to turn the platform into a platform where we can use ethically trained, aka their artists' models. So they're going to train off of their material and their catalog because they own the likeness of the artist. I don't know if the artists were signed off on this or not. But what I'm trying to say is, they said if they can't control competitors who make AI songs that could become more popular than their songs. Why? Because they own a catalog, and the whole goal of a record label is to buy a catalog so that the catalog goes up in value. They're not music creators, they're banks. Okay, so what did they do? They say they can't control this new catalog generator AI machine. Let's go attack it, not because of the ethics, but because they want to control it. So now they control an AI generation machine. And what do they use it for? To take the likeness of their current catalog and let you generate in the likeness of whoever signed to that specific record label and whoever signed off their likeness. So that's critical, because now they can create a walled garden, they call it, for people to basically generate their own. I'm just going to use a random artist because I don't know who he signed to, but like their own Chris Brown song, for example. So instead of listening to what Chris Brown has already put out, or instead of waiting for Chris Brown to get his emotions right to release a song, or instead of waiting for Chris Brown to get off tour, a user who wants to hear more Chris Brown stuff can just type in lyrics about them. Okay, and now they can hear the song dedicated to them with the voice of Chris Brown and the instruments made by the AI machine. That's what the companies are trying to do, is basically create a machine that can multiply and create more supply for their existing catalog because they don't have to go out and now spend acquisition dollars to go buy catalog anymore. Now they can generate catalog and monetize the catalog. And so when they try to galvanize us as artists to go attack these AI companies, you're basically giving the power right back to the top three companies that you claim you're trying to get away from, which is Universal, Sony, and Warner. Okay. So I see the play for what it is. And my hypothesis is that UMG, the same way, I don't know if you guys remember, but I think, was it 2024 with TikTok, when the president was like threatening to remove TikTok? Just before that, I don't know if you guys remember, Universal threatened to remove their catalog from TikTok, or they actually did. I can't remember if they did or not. I think they did for a certain amount of time. And they thought they could stop TikTok. Because what do? They license you the stuff the same way they do with Spotify. They wait for you to grow, like a TikTok, for example, and then they try to flex their muscle when you grow big enough, because you're already at a point where they could take your whole business. So it's very mob-like. This music industry is never about this kind artist, facing opportunity. It's about these vicious business people who just are leeches. And the more you understand this concept, the more you'll be like aware to what actually happens in the music industry. Because again, with TikTok, they removed their catalog. They thought they could, pull the lever. And then you saw the whole president ban TikTok thing because they wanted the United States to control TikTok, and it wasn't working. TikTok didn't sell. They basically said, F y'all, we could do our own thing. We're China. And the US learned very quick. They can't just keep bullying people. And it's through Universal though. So the Universal let their music come right back on the platform because they tried to create a negotiation situation that just didn't work. Okay. And so now TikTok is still booming and their music is still up on there from what I understand. Now their goal, I don't know if you guys remember this, but let me see if I can find an article. So I think it was called the Universal Production Music Platform. So basically, instead of going to an Epidemic Music or, some other platform that has kind of pre-licensed music for social media that people could use, UMG, or Universal Production Music, licensed platform owned by UMG, they were basically trying to get people over there so they could use their music from their platform to put into their social media, and it just didn't roll out the right way. And they were trying to use that as leverage to go against TikTok. And as you guys see, they constantly use their catalog as leverage to get more and more and more, because again, the leech has to be fed more blood and more blood and more blood. Okay, so that's the kind of recurring behavior of the music industry, specifically Universal. So my hypothesis is this: they go after UDO, they settle with UDO because they want to use UDO's technology to create their own walled garden, similar to a Spotify, but this time around it's going to be an AI Spotify. So AIPify is going to be the business model behind this. Now, they said to themselves, if AI music is being uploaded through distributors onto Spotify and people think it's okay, why don't we just own the actual AI generator itself and create our own streaming system around that? Because as you guys know, Suno and UDO, the way people consumed AI music was they would go to those websites and they would actually explore. It was actually pretty fun to watch and listen to other people's stuff. I didn't go into YouTube to find AI songs. That's not what I was on YouTube to do. So they had their own platform. And the record labels figured, why you go through all these steps for it to have the same outcome? They said, let's go to the actual source and the supply. And now they control the supply of the AI generated music to a degree. Now, they're going to position this as, this is good for artists because they get to leverage their existing catalog. But what happens when they have enough technology and enough licensed material to where they can start creating their own artists and don't need to sign artists anymore? So now people who never made music in their life, who own a record label or are on the seats of a record label, can now basically just generate music from their thoughts or have a songwriter do it on their behalf. Okay. And they don't have to touch or sign a new artist ever. So we're basically making the monopoly even bigger. Okay. And this is what I see in the future, is these record labels creating their own platform to go against a Spotify. Because again, if you're a business person, you want to own stuff. You don't want to own a piece of, especially when you have the whole reason people are on your platform, which is the music. So if the record labels own all the music and people are on their platform because of the music, but the platform's growing and growing and growing, and they're not giving the cut back to the people who actually own the thing, of course, at some point, they're going to get to a point where they want to create their own. And instead of going directly against Spotify, which they've seemingly tried to do with the democratization, but instead of going directly against Spotify, now they're going to use this whole different business model, which is this generation model. So that's my hypothesis, and I believe that it's undergoing right now with UMG. Now we still have to wait to see how this I'll say this war ends, because technically the music industry is definitely in a hidden war. If you think about it, Spotify is dealing with basically whoever is first to create the platform to host the thing that can create an infinite supply. That is the person who wins this war. Nobody's going to say it up front, but if you think about it, the interest of Spotify is different than the interest of the record labels. And so they may be doing business together currently, but there's a battle going as to who can do it first. And if Spotify figures that out first, how to get people to consume AI and make it normal, then Spotify wins. And if they can create their own generation tool somehow, then they win. But the key is that is a little hard to understand if you're not into music. You can't train off of random songs. Well, you can, according to these AI companies, but that's why they're in court about it. But let's just say everything has to be ethically trained. Okay. So who owns the ability to even feed AI multi-tracks, meaning the individual sounds of a song at the highest quality? Only the record labels own the masters. So basically they own every single track of every single song that's on the Billboard charts for the most part. And they could feed that line by line through this, machine learning algorithm, assuming that the tech guys are going to work with them. Now, you guys also have to understand the culture of tech and just innovation is usually against the big bullies called the corporations. So like I said before, they usually sign these agreements to where if their employees leave, they can't create competitive platforms. But you see it all the time. Somebody might work for Spotify today because it's popping and they got a big budget from Wall Street, but they don't like the bosses. So they go out and they create their own platform. That happens a lot more than you guys actually think. And so if they have all this, material, the multi-tracks and every single thing, but they don't have the talent to actually run the machine learning and implement this into a system that can generate, because you need really, really smart people who know a lot about a lot. So the problem is that talent is being absorbed by the actual tech companies like NVIDIA, Meta, who are paying people insane salaries to come work for them. And you can't really fight against Wall Street's budget when it comes to that type of stuff. So they have to basically wait for the talent to approach them once that kind of hype dies down from the AI bubble. And whoever gets that talent first, whether it's Spotify or if it's the music industry, that will determine who basically builds out this platform that leverages ethically trained AI that can generate songs from scratch. Because again, even if they have an attribution system that says, okay, somebody types in, I want a Chris Brown R&B song that has these lyrics. Okay, we know clearly we're going to attribute Chris Brown because somebody put the word Chris Brown. But what if I want a down tempo, soft, mellow R&B song that talks about heartbreak? Like, who do you give credit to? Do you give credit to Chris Brown? Do you give credit to James Brown? Do you give credit to, that's the blurry line that they're trying to ride on, because that in-between space is going to be the majority of people for the most part who are typing into these different spaces. And if you can create a system that kind of creates vague attribution, then who's to say that artists are about to go on a whole booming run from this technology? I feel like this is not for the artists who are even signed to the labels. I think this is for the labels to not have to attribute the artist and to use their catalog that they flex around all the time to train this AI just to replace the artist that they go to sign and acquire. This will be an ironic race, however, because even if they train all their music, there's going to be another innovation and another competitor that pops up. And the music industry can't keep leveraging their catalog because now we're at a point that we've never had before, which is we're not in the game of finding assets and acquiring rare assets, because now those assets can be created from thin air. So now we're in the game of marketing and personal brand. So this is the pivotal change in the future of the music industry, where they can't just keep acquiring and becoming bigger and bigger and bigger as a monopoly. Now they have to actually worry about artist development, because that's the personal brand and the storytelling. So the people who are going to win in the future are the personal brand people, because when the supply of music becomes infinite, quite literally infinite, the value goes down, because as you guys know, supply low, high demand equals high price. If the supply is high and the demand is low, you have low price. What happens when the supply is infinite? It doesn't matter how much demand you have, you can never charge enough because the supply is infinite. So blockchain does have some interesting solutions, but the ultimate problem with the blockchain is that I could simply just record the audio and copy and paste it somewhere else. So that's not really a solution. We haven't heard any solutions yet about blockchain technology, but that will be a competitor in the moving race. If there's some kind of, how like you guys might watch Netflix on your laptop or your phone, You go to hit screen record and it blocks it all out. I'm sure somebody's going to create a technology where you go to record, you're on some app, some blockchain app that's like the new Spotify. You go to hit record and then it stops your phone from actually recording on the average user. I'm sure somebody will jailbreak it and be able to, but I think that will tend to prevent piracy while also limiting the supply, the digital supply of the song, and increasing the value of the artist. Now, if somebody creates that technology and we have the infrastructure underneath, I think that will be the actual solution for the music industry, and therefore record labels will become almost irrelevant because you could basically just crowdsource your funding straight from the crowd. That is a little bit ahead future because you have to wait for people to understand crypto and understand blockchain. So that's going to take a lot of learning for the masses to understand. But currently we're just in the AI battle. And the first next phase is that personal brand phase before we get to the Web3 stuff. So we're going to see how this turns out, guys. I just wanted to tell the entire story for this this Spotify situation because I'm not sure that Spotify even knows what these record labels are up to. I can see it clear as day because business is war and it's super obvious. Like the record labels have a lot of self-interest in creating their own platform. They just couldn't because they never had the talent. They never had the basically everything their job was to do was to stop decentralization, but the technology they used was built from decentralization. So they're always going to be against the innovation, and that's what holds them back. So we're going to see how this works out, guys. Thank you guys for listening to this podcast. If you want to learn more, go to busyworksbeats.com. Peace out, guys.